My name is Élise and I am an architect in Lyon. At 34, I have a busy life and a flourishing career. My husband Marc is a lumberjack. A solid and reliable man, always ready to work hard. We have been married for 10 years and have a son, Louis, who is 8 years old. We live in a lovely house on the outskirts of the city, surrounded by greenery, a haven of peace far from the urban hustle. Marc is often absent, working endless hours in the forest. He leaves early in the morning and returns late at night, exhausted and often silent. I understand that his work is exhausting, but I sometimes feel like I'm living with a ghost. Our conversations are limited to the banalities of daily life, and our intimate life is almost non-existent. I have tried to talk to Marc about my feelings of loneliness, but he always seems too tired or preoccupied to listen. It was during one of these long solitary evenings that Thomas entered my life. Thomas, Marc's younger brother, is his complete opposite. At 32, he is charismatic, full of energy, and has a spark in his eyes that my husband sorely lacks these days. Thomas is a teacher, passionate about his work, and always ready to engage in deep and stimulating conversations. Our meetings began innocently at family gatherings. Thomas and I often shared lively discussions about architecture, art, and philosophy. He seemed to understand my frustrations and dreams in a way that Marc never did. Gradually, these discussions extended beyond family gatherings, turning into discreet meetings in cafes, walks along the Rhône, and eventually more intimate moments. I still remember the first time everything changed. It was an autumn afternoon during a gathering at my in-laws' house. As usual, Marc was absorbed in his thoughts, while Thomas and I laughed heartily in the garden. A moment of inattention, a hand brushing against mine, an intense look, and the world around us faded. That day, an invisible barrier broke, and we shared our first kiss, furtive but filled with forbidden promises. This secret affair initially gave me a sense of euphoria. I felt alive, desired, and finally understood. Thomas was everything Marc was not. Every clandestine meeting with him was a breath of fresh air in a stifling existence. We knew what we were doing was dangerous, but adrenaline and passion overpowered reason. Louis, our son, was too young to understand what was really happening, but he probably sensed that something had changed. He asked innocent questions about my absences and seemed intrigued by the moments when Thomas came to the house. I did my best to hide the truth, juggling my roles as a mother, wife, and mistress with desperate skill. Time passed, and the tension mounted. Every family gathering became a minefield, every look from Marc a potential revealer of our secret. Yet, I couldn't help but take the risk, irresistibly drawn to the passion and forbidden nature that Thomas represented. Deep down, I knew this situation couldn't last forever. The danger, the lies, the guilt, all of it would eventually catch up with us. But for now, I let myself be carried away by this adventure, savoring every stolen moment with Thomas, all the while knowing that the price to pay would inevitably be high. My relationship with Thomas became increasingly intense. Every meeting was a delicate dance between passion and danger. We found creative ways to see each other, whether it was during stolen lunches or evenings when Marc worked late. We developed a secret language, with subtle looks and gestures that allowed us to communicate without attracting the attention of others. One day, after a particularly tense family gathering, Thomas suggested I join him at a small house he rented outside the city. It was the perfect refuge, far from prying eyes and judgments. This house became our sanctuary, a place where we could be ourselves without fear of being discovered. Our meetings at this house were moments of pure happiness. We spent hours talking, laughing, and making love with an intensity one had never known before. Thomas made me feel special, unique, and deeply loved. It was as if we were the only ones in the world, lost in our bubble of passion. However, reality always caught up with us. Every return home was a brutal plunge into guilt and anxiety. Marc was not stupid, he sensed that something was wrong. Our arguments became more frequent, and he often accused me of not being present enough for him and Louis. I knew he was right, but I couldn't help but return to Thomas, like a moth drawn to a flame. The situation took a dramatic turn during a long weekend that Marc had decided to spend with the family in the mountains. Thomas was also supposed to join us, and I dreaded this moment. Being all together under the same roof, with Mark and Thomas so close, was a nerve-wracking ordeal. I feared that our secret would be discovered at any moment. That weekend, Louis overheard a conversation between Thomas and me. We were in the kitchen, talking in hushed tones, when he entered unexpectedly. He heard snippets of our conversation and understood that something was wrong. His look of confusion and sadness broke my heart. He said nothing at the time, but I knew it was only a matter of time before he spoke. Back in Lyon, I was on tenterhooks. Every look from Louis was a constant reminder of my betrayal. I tried to reassure him, to make him understand that everything was fine, but he withdrew more and more into himself. Mark, on the other hand, seemed increasingly suspicious. He asked questions, looked for clues, and I felt that our relationship was on the verge of collapsing. Despite everything, I continued to see Thomas. Our passion was too strong, too intense to be ignored. Every meeting was a mix of excitement and fear, pleasure and guilt. We knew we were playing with fire, but we couldn't stop. One evening, while Mark was at a work meeting, Thomas came to our house. Louis was asleep upstairs, and we spent the evening talking and loving each other. It was a moment of pure intensity but also deep despair. We knew we couldn't continue like this, but we couldn't separate either. In the following days, Louis became increasingly distant. One evening, he confronted me with tears in his eyes, asking why I was doing this. My heart broke into 1,000 pieces. How could I explain to an 8-year-old child the complexities of adult relationships, loneliness, passion, and betrayal? I promised him that everything would be fine, that we would sort things out. But deep down, I knew that the moment of truth was approaching. It was no longer possible to continue living in lies. Mark, Louis, Thomas, and I were all caught in this web of secrets and betrayals, and it was time to face the consequences of our actions. The days following this confrontation with Louis were marked by palpable tension at home. Every look exchanged with Mark, every heavy silence, was a sword of Damocles hanging over my head. I knew that the revelation of my infidelity was only a matter of time, and this unbearable weight was eating away at me from the inside. Mark was increasingly absent, not only physically because of his work but also emotionally. Our rare conversations were short, and I could see that he was avoiding any direct confrontation. Yet, his behavior betrayed growing mistrust. He asked indirect questions, scrutinized our finances more closely, and sometimes I caught him staring at me with a disturbing intensity.